No one had lit a lamp in the Greywood hold for 5 years. That was what the council's last dispatch said. I had read it twice on the crossing of the Ashen Reach, once in the supply shelter at the midpoint where I stopped to wait out the worst of the wind, and once in the gray early morning when the fortress wall first came into view against the sky. The words were the same both times, careful in the way council language always is when it means something it does not wish to name plainly. The northern quarantine hold is assessed as unrecoverable. Recommend closure. Resources better directed to the eastern facilities. The lamp in the fever ward, if there had ever been one, would be long dark. The wolves inside would be past reach. The healer positions had not been filled in over 2 years. The place was a loss. I stood at the outer gate in a borrowed name, Wren, Borderland Assessor, traveling alone on routine evaluation, and looked up at the high window of the fever tower. A lamp burned there. Steady, unhurried, amber in the gray afternoon. Not the wavering light of something recently lit or hastily placed. The light of a lamp that had been burning for a long time and had been trimmed and refilled, and tended with the same regularity that had kept it from going out through every winter night the hold had endured. Someone had placed it there, and someone was keeping it placed there, and the keeping was not an accident. My wolf, whom I had believed silenced for 5 years, who had not stirred throughout the long crossing of the Ashen Reach, who lay so still inside me that I had long since stopped expecting anything from him, turned over. Slowly. Once. The way a man in deep sleep shifts toward warmth he has not felt in a long time and has not yet consciously registered but moves toward anyway, because the body remembers what the mind has stopped counting on. I stood at the gate longer than an assessor on routine evaluation had any reason to stand. Then I pushed it open and went in. The outer yard was empty, as the report said. Snow had come over the flagstones in long, smooth sheets, broken by a single path worn clear from the gate to the tower door. The path was fresh boots, small, close set, a heel that pressed deeper on the right. Someone who walked this route every day, always at the same hour, always alone. The edges of the path were sharp. It had been cleared recently and cleared with care. I followed it. The tower door was unlocked. Inside, stone stairs, the smell of dried herbs I could not immediately identify, and beneath that, the warm, unmistakable smell of wolf. Not the sharp sick fever smell I had prepared myself for on the crossing. Something quieter. Something that meant animals at rest rather than animals in crisis. I stopped on the 3rd landing and listened. Below me, nothing. Above me, the soft, deliberate movement of someone who knew exactly where they were going in the dark and did not need to hurry. I climbed. The fever ward occupied the 5th floor entirely, 4 connected rooms that had once been sleeping quarters for the garrison, the walls between them broken through to make one long space. The council's report listed 43 infected wolves, all past coherent response, all categorized as an active danger to any healer attempting close contact. The report had been written 2 years ago by the last official assessor to make the crossing, who had spent 3 days in the hold and left. I stood in the doorway and looked at 43 wolves sleeping. Not the thin, restless half-sleep of fever, the kind where the body is fighting something and losing ground. Deep, slow sleep, the kind that belongs to a body engaged in the specific labor of mending. Some of the wolves were curled in on themselves, some stretched long, some resting with their heads on the flanks of the wolf nearest them. In the far corner of the 2nd room, 3 pups I had not been told existed were piled against the side of a large gray elder wolf who breathed with the patient steadiness of something that has decided, after a long fight, to outlast its illness. I recognized the elder wolf. I had not expected to recognize anything in this place. I had come prepared to find what the report described: devastation, loss, the aftermath of a thing that had been left too long without enough attention. I had not come prepared to find Vor, my father's wolf, lying in lamplight with 3 pups against his side and his breathing slow and even. A woman sat cross-legged on the floor in the center of the ward, her back to the doorway, her hands moving with quiet precision over a wound on the shoulder of a dark wolf who lay very still beneath her attention. She was not speaking. The wolf beneath her hands did not need speech. It needed the steadiness of hands that knew what they were doing and were not afraid of what they found, and her hands were both of those things. The wolf's eyes were half closed. Its breathing was even. It had given itself over to her care with the absolute trust of an animal that has decided once and does not reconsider. She had a healer's satchel beside her, organized with a precision that comes only from long habit, every item in its place, nothing wasted, the things needed most often at the top, the things needed rarely placed at the bottom in order of how rarely. Her hair was pinned back practically, the way a woman pins her hair who has learned that anything else gets in the way of work. Her dress was plain, dark wool, worn at the cuffs but clean. Her lamp stood on the sill of the high window behind her, its wick trimmed to a steady flame that neither reached nor retreated. She had been here a long time. I knew it the way you know something that has already been true for longer than you were paying attention, not from the worn cuffs or the organized satchel or the path of boots in the snow. From the way the wolves breathed around her. Animals this far into illness do not trust easily. The sickness we were dealing with in the northern territories had its roots in isolation. It fed on the absence of pack bond, the hunger of a wolf's nature for the connection that keeps it whole, and when that hunger went long enough unmet, the illness used the space. Wolves in that state did not give trust quickly. They gave it when they gave it at all, to things that had proven themselves steady over time, over many repetitions of small, reliable acts that added up to a kind of certainty the wolf mind could anchor itself to. Whatever Marin was to the wolves of the Greywood Hold, she had not become it in a week. She had become it slowly, through the long work of being present when she could have left. The way they slept near her, not pressed against her as if seeking warmth, but settled around her the way wolves settle in safe territory, with the ease of animals who have stopped needing to be alert in this particular place, told me everything the council's dispatch had not. 16 healers in 3 years, the record said. She was not the 16th. I would discover later she was the 4th. She had come when the 3rd departed, 3 years before I stood in this doorway, and she had simply not left. She heard me on the 4th step back from the doorway. I know this because her hands paused for exactly one breath, one complete breath, in and out, the small stillness of a person who has registered something new and is deciding what it means, and then continued their work, as if she had assessed the situation in that single breath and concluded that whatever had arrived at the doorway was not sufficient reason to stop. The gate was supposed to be locked, she said. She did not turn around. It was not, I said. I'll see to it in the morning. A brief pause, her hands still moving. There's a room on the 2nd floor. The cot is made up. I'd suggest you use it before coming any closer. I don't know where you've traveled from, and I won't risk carrying something new into the ward. She was not impolite about it. She was simply precise in the same way her satchel was precise. Everything in the right order. What came first, and what came first here was the protection of the wolves she was responsible for. I'm not carrying illness, I said. Everyone who crosses the reach says that. I've traveled north before. I've been near the infected territories. My system has adapted. A longer pause this time. The wolf beneath her hands shifted slightly and resettled, and she adjusted without interrupting her rhythm. 2nd floor, she said. There's soup on the kitchen fire. It's been on since midday. It will still be good. I'll speak with you in the morning. It was a dismissal, delivered without hostility or apology, and I took it as such. I found the kitchen, found the soup, found the cot on the 2nd floor that she had made up at some point, not for me specifically, but on what I understood to be a standing principle. Someone might arrive and need a place, and it cost nothing to keep one ready. The soup was better than anything I had eaten on the 3-day crossing of the Ashen Reach. I ate in the empty kitchen in the low light of the banked fire, and listened to the silence of the hold around me, the particular silence of a building that has one person in it who knows exactly what she is doing and is doing it. My wolf turned again in the dark, toward the floor above. I lay on the cot in my clothes, and looked at the stone ceiling for a long time before sleep came. She came to the kitchen in the morning while I was still at the table, a cup of something warm in my hands that was not quite tea, but was close enough to serve the same purpose. She moved through the room with the economy of someone who has been living alone for long enough to have shed everything unnecessary. No acknowledgement of my presence beyond a single nod that confirmed she was aware of me, then directly to the fire to check the pot, then to the shelf to collect what she needed for the morning round. I watched her and said nothing for a moment, the way you learn to wait when you have spent time enough in the world to understand that some things need to settle before they are worth speaking into. "How many did you lose in the night?" I asked. "None." She did not look up from the shelf. "I haven't lost one in 11 months. I set my cup down. "The council's report says." "The council's report is 2 years old. No one from the council has made the crossing since the third assessor left." She turned then, finally, and looked at me with the direct regard of someone who has been alone long enough to have stopped performing. Not unkind, precise. "Who are you?" "Ren, Borderland Assessment." Her eyes moved over me once, a thorough assessment, conducted without any pretense that she wasn't conducting it. "Assessors travel in pairs," she said, "and not across the reach in winter alone." I said nothing. She held my look for a moment, reading whatever was in it, and then turned back to the shelf. "The wolves know you," she said. "Or they know something about you. The gray elder at the back of the third room, Vor, raised his head when you came up the stairs last night. He's done that for no one since I arrived here." A pause. "He's the one who bit the last assessor so badly they had to be carried back to the passage camp." "I know Vor," I said. The words were out before I could consider whether to let them go. She was still. Not the stillness of someone startled, the stillness of someone whose thinking has just shifted to accommodate a new piece of information that changes the shape of what they were already considering. "Then you should tell me who you are," she said carefully. "Because in 3 years, the only person I've heard of who knew Vor personally was the Alpha King of Veldrath. And he's been dead for 5. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the single window, snow was coming again, slow, steady, the kind that settles in rather than passes through. "He is not dead," I said. She looked at me for a long time. "No," she said at last, very quietly. "I don't suppose he is." She did not make anything of it. That was the first thing I understood about her. She did not perform her reactions. She absorbed the information, gave it the space of a few breaths to settle into its proper place, and then continued her morning round. Not dismissively, not without care for what it meant. Simply with the understanding that the morning round still needed doing regardless, and the wolves in the ward above us could not wait on the adjustment of her expectations. I followed her up. She moved through the fever ward with a quiet competence that had nothing in common with the formal efficiency of the healers I had known in the capital, who operated in ordered steps and recorded methodologies and the language of institutional procedure. She moved like someone who had learned this particular place, these particular animals, this particular illness, not as a category of things to be managed, but as a collection of specific lives to be attended to one at a time. She knew each wolf by name, not the numbers and designations in the council's files. Names she had given them herself, practical names, chosen for something true about each animal. Vor, Hatch, for the distinctive marking along his jaw. The gray-muzzled female in the second room she called Seam, for the old scar running the length of her right side. The 3 pups from the corner she called the Remnants, because they had arrived after everything else had seemed to be established, thin and shaking and very young, and they had stayed. She checked wounds and replaced dressings with the economy of someone who does not waste motion. She assessed fever in the one still fighting the worst of it with her hands and her attention, not with instruments. She had learned to read the animals directly, which I recognized as a more reliable method than anything that relied on tools. She spoke to each wolf in the low, unhurried register of someone who is thinking aloud in company they trust, not the self-conscious reassurance of a healer performing calm, but the genuine, continuous commentary of a person at work. I stayed at the edge of the room and watched. My wolf was not still inside me now. He had not been still since I stood at the gate and looked up at the lamp. He was awake, more present, more himself than he had been in 5 years. The particular focused attention that had always signaled something real was coming had returned, and he was directing it at the woman moving through the ward with her satchel and her unhurried hands. That attention had never meant something small. In the days before the illness took him down, when I was whole and he and I moved together without space between us, that focused attention had always been the precursor to something that mattered. I had learned not to dismiss it. I had learned, over many years, to follow where it pointed. I watched Marin work, and I tried to understand what I was seeing. 16 healers in 3 years. The first 4 had lasted between 2 weeks and 2 months. The last 12 had not managed a single season. The illness was difficult to work near. The wolves in the acute phase were dangerous, unpredictable, and the emotional weight of being surrounded by so much suffering was something that the council's healers, trained in clean facilities with regular rotation and relief, had found they could not sustain in isolation. She had been here for 3 years without rotation and without relief. I watched her kneel beside the wolf called Hatch and replace a dressing on his foreleg, speaking to him while she worked, and I tried to identify what was different about her from the healers I had known. It was not skill alone, though she was clearly skilled. It was not endurance alone, though her endurance was evident. It was something in the quality of her attention, a completeness to it, a fullness, as if she were genuinely and entirely present in this room and had no competing pull from any other place. She was not managing the ward. She was living in it. Vor tracked her movement from his corner. When she came to him, he was already watchful, waiting. She sat beside him and examined his shoulder, the site of the wound that had been worst when I had still been receiving accurate reports years ago. And he let her, with the specific quality of surrender that belongs to animals who have considered the person before them, and decided, at some depth below instinct, that surrender is the right response. She glanced at me across the room. "Come and sit with him," she said. "He's been aware of you since you came through the door, and it's making him expend energy he needs for other things." I crossed the room and sat beside Vor. He looked at me with the long, measured attention of an elder wolf who has waited long enough to have stopped keeping count of the waiting. Then he leaned his head against my knee. My chest did something I did not have a name for. Something that had been locked for a long time released a fraction, not all at once, not dramatically, but in the specific careful way that things release when they have been under pressure long enough to have forgotten how not to be. "He's been coming back to himself for about 4 months, Marin said from across the room, not looking up. "He has difficult nights still, but he knows where he is. He knows what's around him." A pause. The reports that classified him as the most dangerous animal in the ward were written when he was at his worst, when the isolation was complete and there was nothing for his wolf nature to anchor to. He's different now. What changed? She looked up briefly. The same thing that changed for all of them. I stopped leaving. She let me help with the morning round. Not from need, she had managed the rounds for 3 years without assistance, but from the practical understanding that available labor, properly directed, served the wolves better than principle. She gave me clear, specific instructions. She did not modify them for the fact of who I was, which I was grateful for in a way I didn't examine until later. Around midday, when the round was done and the ward had settled into its late morning quiet, She came down to the kitchen, and I followed, and we sat at opposite ends of the table with our cups and talked properly for the first time. "Tell me how you quieted the fever in the first ones," I said. "The reports from the early phase said it wasn't possible, that the illness was self-sustaining once it reached a certain depth." "The reports from the early phase were correct about what they observed," she said. She turned her cup slowly between her hands, the gesture of someone who thinks through their hands as much as through words. "They were not correct about what they concluded from it. The illness sustains itself when the conditions that feed it are sustained. What they observed, wolves in acute crisis, illness deepening regardless of intervention, was not evidence that the illness couldn't be arrested. It was evidence that the interventions being tried weren't addressing what was actually wrong." "Which was?" "Isolation," she said. "The illness is not a fever that attacks the body from within. It's a response, the wolf's nature attempting to fill the space where the pack bond should be. When the pack bond is severed or absent, that space doesn't stay empty. The wolf nature is not built for emptiness. It fills the space with whatever is available, and in the absence of a real bond, what fills it is the illness itself. The illness becomes the thing the wolf is connected to. The stronger the wolf's nature, the more completely it fills the space and the worse the fever." I was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "So the healers who tried to treat the fever directly were treating the symptom," she said. "The fever responded to treatment in the short term and returned because the condition producing it was unchanged. The wolves were still alone. The healers came in, applied treatment, and left. From the wolf's perspective, that was another kind of loss, something arrived and then departed, which confirmed the isolation rather than addressing it." "And you?" "Stayed," she said simply. "I was here every morning when the wolves woke and every night when they settled. Nothing about my presence was inconsistent. After enough time, and it took a long time, longer than I expected, the wolf nature had something to recognize as constant. Not a pack bond. I'm not their alpha and I'm not their kin, and I didn't pretend otherwise. But I was a constant, and constancy is something the wolf nature can anchor to when the deeper bonds are unavailable." The fever retreated. Slowly, over months, not days, and with losses in the early phase while I was still learning what worked and what didn't. She said this evenly, without any quality of self-protection. "I made mistakes. I learned from them." "You stayed through the losses." She looked at me with a directness that was not challenging but simply honest. Where else would I have gone? It was not a rhetorical question, and she did not deliver it as one. She had considered this, I understood, had considered it during the difficult first winter, during the losses, during the phases of the illness when the work seemed to be making no discernible difference, and had arrived each time at the same answer. The work was here. The wolves were here. She was the person who had come and chosen to be here, which meant she was the person who was here, which meant the work was hers to do. I had commanded men for 20 years. I had selected soldiers not on the basis of skill first, but on the basis of character, because I had learned early that skill without character breaks under weight, and character without skill can be taught, but the other way around is rarely true. In 20 years of choosing people for difficult positions, I had built a particular sensitivity to the quality I valued most. The quality of someone who understands what is required and does it without reference to whether it is convenient, whether it is recognized, whether it costs them something they expected to keep. I had not met it like this before, not with this quietness, not with this complete absence of performance. 11 months without a loss, I said. 10 before that with losses, and a winter before that where I wasn't sure the work was reaching anything at all. She looked at the table. I nearly left in the second winter, not because the work wasn't worth doing, because I wasn't certain I was capable of it. A pause. But I had no one to tell me whether I was capable of it or not, and leaving wouldn't have answered the question. She had stayed, in other words, because leaving would have meant accepting an answer she wasn't sure was true. My wolf had come fully awake. He had not been this awake, this present, this entirely himself, since the illness took him down. He was not pressing forward urgently. He was simply aware, with the specific quality of attention that I had learned over 20 years meant he was looking at something real, something that mattered in the way that only certain things matter. I said nothing about this. In the afternoon she showed me the log. 3 years of daily entries, written in a careful hand, not the formal notation of official record but the precise working log of a practitioner who writes for the future reader rather than for the current record keeper. She had noted each wolf's condition at morning and evening. She had noted changes, setbacks, progressions. She had noted her methods, including the ones that failed and specifically what they failed to address, so that whoever came after her, if someone came after her, would not repeat the same mistakes in the same conditions. She had also noted, in brief entries scattered through the 3 years, the broader conditions of the hold, the supply deliveries that had become increasingly irregular, the last communication from the council's office, 14 months ago, the last healer who had come to assist and then departed 2.5 years ago, and the subsequent period during which she had managed the ward, the supply inventory, and the hold's basic maintenance alone. She did not note these as complaints. She noted them as facts about the conditions under which the work was being done, relevant to any future reader who might need to understand the context. The supply line has been inconsistent, I said, reading an entry from the previous autumn. It's improved since spring. Someone at the northern depot started sending a supplementary shipment without being asked. She paused. I don't know who ordered it. It wasn't communicated through official channels. It had been one of my people, operating on standing instruction I had given before the false name crossing, to maintain the Greywood supply line regardless of the council's assessment, through unofficial channels if necessary. I had not known what I would find when I arrived. I had known I was not willing to let the decision be made by omission, by the slow failure of support that would have made the closure inevitable whether or not it was the right decision. I did not tell her this. The council's order, I said instead, setting the log down. You know why I'm here. I assumed, she said, from the moment you told me you know Vor. The dispatch recommends closure. I was sent to confirm the recommendation. She looked at me steadily, and I am not going to confirm it. A silence, not a surprised silence, more the silence of someone who is absorbing a thing they had hoped for but had stopped counting on. The council will send someone else, she said. The council, I said, is going to be engaged with a number of things when I return north. I don't anticipate the Greywood hold will be their first priority. You're going back. Eventually, I looked at the log. There are things I need to understand here first, if you're willing. She was quiet for a moment. The lamp on the high windowsill burned steady behind her. All right, she said. I stayed through the rest of the winter. I had not planned to stay more than a week. Each day gave me reasons that could have been categorized as practical. There was more to understand about the method she had developed, more to record, more that was relevant to the eastern facilities where the same illness was advancing and the same interventions were failing, and all of that was true. But it was not the whole of it. The whole of it was that this place was doing something to me that I could not name precisely and did not want to interrupt by leaving. She taught me her methods in the way she did everything, practically, without formality, thinking aloud in my presence and trusting that I would follow. She explained what she watched for in each wolf. She showed me how the illness presented differently in animals of different ages and temperaments, and why the response needed to be specific to the individual rather than general to the category. She showed me how she could tell, in the early morning before the ward had fully woken, which wolves were moving toward a difficult day and needed more of her attention, and which were stable enough to be left to their own resources. I learned faster than she expected. I could see her adjusting her expectations as the days went by, not with surprise exactly, more with the mild revision of someone who had formed an estimate without complete information and was updating it as the information arrived. "You were raised near wolves," she said one evening, a statement, not a question. "Since I was 4, my father ran a large pack. I grew up in it more than in the formal household." "That explains why Vor trusts you," she paused, "and why you sit with him the way you do." "How do I sit with him?" She considered this. "Like you're not waiting for him to perform something, like being near him is sufficient by itself." It was the truest thing anyone had said to me in a long time. She said it without any awareness that it was remarkable, as an observation about a fact, not as a gift, which made it more true, not less. I sat with Vor every day. He recovered, slowly and with difficulty, the way old wolves recover from things that have taken much from them, not in a line, but in irregular steps forward with occasional retreats, each retreat a little shorter than the one before. He had difficult nights when the old fever confusion returned, and he did not know where he was. On those nights, Marin would sit beside him and I would sit on his other side, and between us, the thing he needed was simply presence, which costs nothing and which we both had available, and by morning he would know where he was again. In those nights, I understood something about what she had built here that I had not fully understood from the rounds and the log. She had made herself into a constant not because she was naturally constant. She had told me herself she had nearly left in the second winter, but because she had decided, at some point in that second difficult winter, that constancy was what was needed, and she was the person available to provide it. It was not a gift she was born with. It was a choice she had made and remade every morning when she got up and went upstairs to the ward. That is what character is at the level that matters, not the things that come naturally, the things you choose over and over in the absence of anyone telling you to choose them. My wolf was fully awake now, fully present, fully himself. He had not pressed himself on me, had not surged or howled or done any of the things I had heard other alphas describe when the bond recognition happened. He had simply arrived. He was simply here, in a way he had not been for 5 years, and his attention was on Marin with the steady, certain quality of something that has found what it was looking for, and is no longer in a hurry because the finding is already accomplished. I had been a king for 20 years. I understood what the mate bond was. I had watched my council bring eligible women from every territory in Veldrath, women of rank, of strength, of notable ability, and had watched each time for the thing that was supposed to happen and had felt nothing, and after long enough had concluded that the bond was simply not going to be part of what my life contained. Some kings were like that. The bond was not guaranteed. I had been wrong about what was not guaranteed. I had been here the whole time. The night of the first thaw came in the last week of winter, the snow going soft on the outer walls, the air carrying for the first time the cold smell of earth beneath ice, the specific quality of darkness that means the season is about to shift. We had come down from the evening round together, her lamp in her hand, moving through the familiar dark of the tower stairs, and in the doorway of the kitchen she stopped. Vor was there. He had not come down from the ward before. He was not strong enough for the stairs, or he had not been, but there he was, standing in the kitchen doorway with the calm authority of an old wolf who has made a decision, and is simply waiting for those around him to understand it. He looked at me. Then he looked at Marin. Then he looked between us with the patient, measuring attention of an animal who has observed a great many things over a long life and knows precisely what he is looking at. He walked to Marin and sat at her feet. Not the uncertain crouch of a wolf unsure of its welcome. The settled, complete sitting of a wolf who is exactly where he intends to be and has no uncertainty about it. She looked down at him, then she looked at me across the kitchen. I felt it then, the thing I had been circling for months, that my wolf had known from the first night at the gate. Not a thunder, Not the overwhelming force that some alphas described, the sudden, unmistakable crash of the recognition hitting all at once. Something quieter and more complete than that. A settling behind the sternum, a long exhale of something that had been held in tension for a very long time, the sensation of a thing that has been waiting in patience finally arriving at what it was waiting for. She felt it too. I could see it in her, not alarm, not surprise, not the performance of reaction. The same quality of stillness she brought to everything that required absorption. She was taking it in with the full attention she brought to anything real. "Oh," she said very quietly. Vor did not move from her feet. "I should tell you," I said carefully, "that I had already decided against the council's order before this." "I know that," she said. "I want you to know it because what this is," I paused. "I want it to be separate from that. I want you to know the decision was made first." She looked at me steadily. "It matters to me," she said, "that you decided that first." I understood. She was not a woman who wanted to be chosen for what she was. She wanted to be the person who had stayed and worked and been sufficient. And then the bond could come on top of that, or it could not. But the staying and the working and the sufficiency would be hers regardless. They would belong to her independent of anything else. The bond had come on top of that. "I think I have been coming toward this place for a long time," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I think what I've been doing here has also been, in some sense, a preparation, though I wouldn't have called it that." "No," I said, "you'd have called it the work." The corner of her mouth moved. "Yes." Vor looked up at us both, and then placed his great gray head on his forepaws, with the satisfaction of an elder wolf, whose assessment of a situation has been confirmed. "You should stay," she said, "until the spring passage opens." "I should stay," I said, "longer than that." I sent the message north when the spring passage cleared. I wrote it in my own name and sealed it with my own seal, the seal that had not been used in 5 years and whose appearance would require significant adjustment of expectations in the capital. I did not soften it. There was no softening available that would have served the truth. The Greywood hold stands. The council's closure order is dismissed by authority of this office. The northern quarantine ward is under the keeping of Marin of the Ashen Reach, appointed ward keeper by direct command of the Alpha King of Veldrath. Any order contrary to this appointment is void and will be treated accordingly. The infected wolves of the Greywood hold are recovering. 11 months without loss at the time of this communication. The methods developed in the hold are to be documented in full, distributed to the eastern facilities immediately, and implemented. The Council's own reports, which assess the hold as unrecoverable, are withdrawn from record on the grounds that they were based on insufficient observation. A corrected assessment is enclosed. I will return to the capital at the appropriate time. I recommend the Council use the intervening period to examine what other situations have been written off on the basis of reports produced by observers who did not stay long enough to see what was actually happening. I sent it with the 3 fastest runners the hold supply depot had available. Then I went upstairs to the ward. Marin was doing the morning round. The wolves lay in the long, familiar quiet, the remnants running their undignified circuit of the third room in a game that had no rules Marin or I had been able to identify. Vor in his corner near the window with the long-suffering patience of an elder wolf coexisting with the energy of youth. Seam and Hatch side by side in the warmth of the second room's best spot. Everything in its place. Everything breathing. She looked up when I came through the door. "It's sent," I said. "Good," she said, and turned back to her work. I helped with the morning round. I had stopped needing instructions for most of it. My hands had learned the work over the winter months, the specific approach each wolf needed, the particular pressure of addressing change, the way to sit with Vor when the morning was difficult, and the way to leave him when the morning was easy. The wolves had learned my hands. There was a rhythm to the shared work that I had not expected when I arrived at the gate in a borrowed name with a council's order in my pocket. We left for the capital in the late spring, when the reach was passable and the ward had a second healer, a young woman named Davin whom Marin had agreed to accept after I sent for her, and whom she had spent 3 weeks training with the same practical directness with which she had taught me. Davin had the quality of attention the work needed. Marin was certain of it within the first week, and Marin's certainty about such things was something I had learned not to second-guess. Vor came with us. He had decided this himself, in the way of old wolves who have outlived enough to be done with arguing about their choices. He was strong enough for the journey by then, though Marin and I both maintained an unofficial watch on his pace that he was entirely aware of and entirely indifferent to. The remnants came also, because they were young enough to go wherever Vor went and old enough to understand that going was a choice. The capital had spent the month since my message in a state of managed adjustment that had not quite resolved itself into peace. I walked into the judgment hall without announcement, having developed over the course of a winter the habit of not performing my entrances. The 12 lords of the council were assembled, in the various arrangements of those preparing either for confrontation or for the beginning of acceptance, and I stood at the head of the table and told them what I had found. I told them what I had found before I told them who Marin was. I wanted the record to hold the truth in its proper order. I told them about the 43 wolves sleeping in a place the council had called unrecoverable. I told them about 11 months without a single loss, in a ward their own reports had categorized as beyond the reach of intervention. I told them about the methods, the specific understanding of the illness's nature, the role of constancy, the long, slow work of providing what the wolves needed rather than the treatment that was procedurally correct. I told them about the log, which Marin had placed on the table before she sat down, 3 years of daily entries written for the reader who would eventually come, and I told them that the reader had come and the log held everything. Then I told them who Marin was. Not in the language of the bond first. I told them first in the language of what she had done. The healer who had come as the 4th, 3 years before, when 3 had already departed and who had not left. Who had worked for 36 months without supplement or acknowledgement or any confirmation that what she was doing was reaching anything, and who had built from nothing but steadiness and time something that the council's resources and formal interventions had been unable to build in the previous 5 years of trying, who had developed, in isolation, a more accurate understanding of the illness's fundamental nature than any of the council's official researchers had reached. And then I told them she was the Luna of Veldrath. The mate bond was a fact of the record. I made it so plainly, without softening or ceremony, because it was the truth, and the truth deserved to be stated directly. The hall was quiet. Not the quiet of assent, the quiet of 12 people absorbing something they had not anticipated. Some of them had authored the closure dispatch. Some of them had signed the recommendation. None of them had made the crossing to sea. I looked at them for a moment. Veldrath has a ward keeper, I said. She is also its Luna. If either of those things presents a difficulty for anyone in this room, the difficulty belongs to that person and not to us. The quiet held. Vor, who had been at the back of the hall against the wall, rose. He walked, with the measured, deliberate pace of an old wolf who has made many assessments in his long life, and is not uncertain of this one, to the front of the hall. He sat down beside Marin. The remnants, who were young, and had not yet developed any particular deference to the weight of formal occasions, followed him. The wolves looked at the lords with the patient, measuring attention of animals who have seen illness and recovery, and the long, difficult work of difficult winters, and are not easily impressed by stone halls and formal dress. Someone bowed, then someone else, then by increments the rest. Marin did not need the ceremony. She had never needed the ceremony, and she would have been the first to say so, plainly, without false modesty, because she did not have false modesty. She understood her own worth clearly. She simply did not require external confirmation of it to go on being what she was. But I gave it to her anyway the next morning in the small courtyard of the hold before we made the final journey to the capital. Not the formal investiture, which would come later, but the naming. I spoke her name and what she was and what I had found her doing and what it had cost her and what it had meant. The wolves were there. Vor was there. The remnants were there. Her lamp was burning in the high window of the fever tower, because she had not put it out, and I understood from the way she had left it that she did not intend to. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me for a moment and then simply nodded, the nod of someone who has heard a thing spoken truly and acknowledges it as true. "There's one thing you got wrong," she said. "Tell me." "You said it cost me something." She thought about it. "The winters were difficult. I won't pretend they weren't. But it didn't cost me in the way you mean, not in the way of a sacrifice that depletes what it takes from. It was more like the opposite of that." She looked toward the fever tower. "Staying was the thing that kept me from losing something I didn't know I had," she said. "Every morning I went up to the ward and the wolves were there and the work was there. That was all, but it turned out to be sufficient. I have governed Veldrath for 20 years, and now I govern it differently. The difference is difficult to articulate in the language of governance, of policy and resource, and the management of large things. It is easier to describe in smaller terms. I take longer before I sign orders that say something is unrecoverable. I send people to look. Not assessors with borrowed names and closed instructions, but people with the quality of attention the situation requires, and enough time to understand what they are actually seeing. I do not accept the assessments of observers who did not stay. The Eastern facilities have been using Marin's methods for 2 years. The rate of loss in the Eastern wards has fallen by more than half. The illness is not gone and the work is not finished, but the wolves there are sleeping the way the wolves of the Greywood Hold slept, and the healers there are writing their own logs for the future readers who will need them. Marin oversees the training of those healers. She does it the way she does everything, practically, without performance, thinking aloud in the presence of people who need to follow the thinking and trusting that they will. She is a harder teacher than most expect. She does not soften the difficult parts. She believes, and I have come to agree with her, that the difficult parts are exactly what need to be understood most clearly, because they are the parts where people are most likely to leave if they have not been prepared. She kept the lamp in the high window of the Greywood Hold. The healers who came after her understood without being told that the lamp was not a practical measure. There is light enough in the ward now, better supply lines, lamps in every room, but a record. A record of what had been done there and by whom and through what kind of winter. They keep it lit. I know this because I ask, when the quarterly reports come from the Northern Hold. It is not information anyone would think to include. I ask because I want to know, because the lamp burning in the high window is the thing I think of when I need to think of something true. At night I sometimes wake before Marin does and lie in the quiet of the room we share, listening to the building breathe. She sleeps the way she does everything, completely, without performance, until the work calls her back. There are no competing demands in her sleep. She is simply resting, and then she will simply be awake, and the transition will be as uncomplicated as the rest of it. I have been a king for 20 years. I have slept in rooms that were quieter, rooms that were more defended, rooms that were considered in every way that is typically considered. None of them have felt like the rooms she is in. She makes wherever she is into a place that is inhabited. The organized satchel on the table, the log open to the current page. Her lamp, always, she keeps one wherever she is, always trimmed, always sufficient. The particular quality of her presence, which fills a space without crowding it, the way a fire fills a room with warmth without claiming the room as its own. I grew up understanding rooms as positions, places I held, places I managed, places I would eventually leave. The calculation was always about duration, about what came next, about the assessment of what a room required, and how to meet that requirement until the requirement changed. I do not make that calculation in the room she is in. The lamp burns in the high window of the Greywood hold still. I stood at that gate on a gray winter afternoon with a council's order in my pocket and my wolf silent inside me, and I nearly did not go in. I had the assessment half written in my mind before I reached the gate, the language already forming, the case for closure already organized, because it was the easier thing, and the council wanted it, and I was tired from the crossing, and the hold looked, from the outside, like everything the dispatch said it was. Then the lamp. Steady in the high window of the fever tower. The kind of steady that means someone has been tending it for a long time as a matter of course, not as a special thing, but as the ordinary practice of someone who keeps the lamp lit because the lamp should be lit, and that is the end of the consideration. I stood at the gate, and my wolf turned toward it, and I pushed the gate open and went in. What I found inside was not what I was sent to find. It was not what the council expected me to find. It was not what I had prepared myself to find. It was 43 wolves sleeping, and 3 pups in a corner, and an elder wolf I had not seen in 5 years breathing slowly in the lamplight, and a woman cross-legged on the stone floor with her hands moving steadily over a wound and her back to the door and her attention entirely on the work. She did not turn around when I came in. She did not perform anything. She absorbed my presence in a single breath and continued her work, because the work continued. That is who she was when I found her. That is who she is. I am a different man than the one who stood at the gate with a borrowed name and a closed instruction, and a wolf he had believed lost turning slowly, toward a warmth he had stopped counting on. The difference is not in the obvious things, not the governance or the restored wolf or the mate bond settled into the ordinary fabric of what I am. The difference is in something smaller, which is that I no longer accept that the lamp being lit means nothing just because the gate looks dark from the outside. The lamp means someone is there. Someone has been there. Someone chose to stay when they could have left and lit the lamp and kept lighting it and is still there. That is worth going in to see. She said on the night of the first thaw, when Vor walked to her and sat at her feet, and the bond arrived as a long exhale at the end of years of waiting. She said, very quietly, "Oh, that was the whole of it. That was enough. It still is."